Hello and welcome to our class for week 13. This week we're going to focus on language and literacy development in kindergarten. So for our agenda, we're just going to focus on two things. I want to go over the plan change for language and learning environment assignment, and then we're going to get into the language and literacy development in kindergarten. So for the change environment assignment, it's the plan change for language learning and literacy environment assignment. And the goal of the assignment is for you to look at the learning environment in which your focal child is and determine a few changes that could be made to that environment to improve the language and literacy development for your focal child. So here you have an image of the rubric. So I advise you to look at the rubric, read it carefully, and see what is going to be assessed. And also look at the exemplar. There's an exemplar on Blackboard under assignments, under plan change for language learning environment assignment, and you can look at Valerie Green's assignment there and see how she did it. One thing important to note is that the format in which you're presenting this is PowerPoint. So this is not going to be a Word document assignment. It's going to be done in PowerPoint. And the reason for that is that this assignment is then going to be inserted into your portfolio, your language and literacy portfolio for your focal child, which is your final assignment. And this assignment is part of that portfolio. And that portfolio is also going to be presented in a PowerPoint format. So you're going to take this assignment after it's been graded and you've made the modifications that you need to make based on the feedback, and are going to then incorporate it into your PowerPoint presentation for your portfolio assignment. So that's why we're doing it in PowerPoint. Another thing to be mindful of, and you're going to see this in the exemplar, is that you need to pair each change that you're proposing with standards. So they need to be aligned with standards. So you need to use the NACCE standards, one of them for each of the proposed changes, and the Maryland College and Career Ready standards, or the Common Core state standards for English language arts. So all of these are linked under that assignments plan change for language learning environment assignment on Blackboard. You can click on those links and look at the standards and select the ones that best align, that best match the planned change for the environment that you're proposing. The other thing that the changes need to be based on is the data that you have on your focal child. So from things that you've observed in your observations, from your family visit, maybe even from the assessments, the literacy assessments that you did for your focal child, you might have found that your focal child might be very advanced in this, but might be struggling in this other aspect. And with a change in the environment, you might be able to help them overcome the struggles that you observed. And so that data is going to give you a justification of a reason of being for that proposed change that you're making, right? So keep in mind that every time you propose a change, it's not just explaining, well, I want to change this in the environment for my focal child, but that change needs to be paired with specific standards, one from NACCE and one from either Maryland College and Career Ready standards or Common Core for ELA standards. And it needs to be based on something that you observed that your focal child needs. So it can't be just, oh, well, I want to change the environment. I want to change the posters that I have hanging on the walls for my students just because I need some change in my classroom. That's not a good reason. It has to be based on something that you observed in your focal child and then propose a change that was going to help your focal child in one way or another. I know that a lot of you are in a virtual environment right now and are observing children through whatever virtual platform your site is using. So imagine your child in a regular classroom. So what would a regular classroom be able to provide in terms of environment as a support for your focal child for the advancement of their language and literacy development? So don't constrain yourself only to the virtual learning environment, but think about if you were in a regular classroom, in a regular school building with children, what would you be able to provide in the environment that would support their language and learning development? This way you're not just limited to the virtual environment when thinking of how to support your focal child. Okay, this assignment is due on week 14, which is a week from this week. And you're supposed to upload it onto Blackboard like every other assignment that you've done. So let me know if you have questions. Email me with questions or post any questions for the instructor on Blackboard on that discussion board. Okay, so let's get into the components of kindergartners' literacy transaction. So we've been working with the transactional model to acquire literacy and language development. We've looked at different models and we discovered that this is the most current one, the most comprehensive one, and we've been working with that model. So looking at that model, what would it look like for kindergartners? And what we find is that there are several components. There's in essence 3 main components. One is the knowledge that children have, what they bring with them, the knowledge about language that they bring into the classroom. The second thing is the texts or literacy related tasks the children are going to be exposed to. And this is up to you. This is your responsibility in terms of the person that is planning the curriculum that the children are going to be engaged in, right? So you're selecting those texts, you're selecting those activities and those lessons that you're teaching, right? So based on the curriculum that you are following or that you are designing, if you have leeway to design and expand upon the particular curriculum that you're using. And then the third component is the context in which the literacy event occurs. The classroom context and that assignment of the change of the environment, that is going to reflect that context. So the context is the third sort of key component here. All those 3 components come into place, and then there's a mediation that's happening. It's a mediation between the knowledge that the children have about language and literacy, the texts that are being used, and the context in which you are having those literacy experiences or lessons. And the mediation can be done by an adult, parent, or a teacher, or it could be done by a peer or an older sibling. So anybody that knows a little bit more than the child, and we're looking at this model from a single child's perspective, right? So anybody that's a little bit more advanced than the child is going to be able to mediate. The ultimate goal is construction of meaning. So we want to make sure that all of these components are in place and are playing together in a way that the end result is going to be for the children to create meaning. Okay, so here you have a figure 8.1, and in your edition, your second edition of this book, the 2019 version, it's going to be figure 8.1 as well, but it's going to be on page 112. And it's going to look a little bit different from this in terms of the graphics, but the content is pretty much the same. So you have the kindergartner's knowledge of oral and written language, and then you have the texts that is going to be used. And the text, again, can be dictated or it can be an actual book that you're using. And then the context in which the literacy-related events occur. And it could be happening at home, it could be happening at school, it can be happening in the community. As teachers, we're focusing on these events occurring at school, in the classroom environment. And then you have the mediation. Again, we said the mediator could be a parent, a teacher, an older sibling, a peer, and anybody that is a little bit more advanced than the child. And then the ultimate end result is going to be the construction of meaning. And by construction of meaning, we want to emphasize on comprehension if we're reading, or on the message created has meaning if we're writing, right? If the child is writing. Okay, so let's look at what are some key signs of emergent literacy in kindergartners. So we know, because of the transactional model, that the kindergartners bring knowledge, prior knowledge with them. So we want to know what their oral language competencies are. We want to know how fluently they speak, how well constructed are their sentences in their oral language and their oral speech. And we want to know if they have, and how advanced are they in the 5 key areas of knowledge, right? So we want to look at their semantics, we're going to look at their syntax, we're going to look at their morphology, at their pragmatics, and we want to know, and lastly, their phonology. So we also want to be knowledgeable of their pronunciation when they speak. We want to know what their interests in literacy-related events are. So how interested are they in these events, in these activities, in these kinds of experiences? We want to know if they're reading and writing for personal purposes. So if they go to the literacy area, do they write just to put their name on their work, or do they actually write to tell a story, to convey meaning to others about what they, for example, they might have drawn? We want them, or we want to know if they're focusing on print. So are they decoding, meaning when they interact with written print, do they try to read it? Do they try to decode it to make sense of it? And then when they're writing, are they encoding? Are they trying to make sense and give and provide meaning when they interact with written materials? We also want to know their metalinguistic knowledge. So how much do they know about language, and how much do they know about reading and writing? Not necessarily the skills of reading and writing and their oral language fluency and proficiency, but what do they know about these particular skills? And then what is their phonological awareness? So how aware are they of sounds related to letters, and letters together making words, and words being pronounced in a certain way? So what is their phonological awareness to the language or languages that they are exposed to? So in your book, you have several checklists that you could use in order to observe the different language and literacy competencies of kindergartners and be able to identify where they are, because we really want to know what their prior knowledge is to know where we're starting off from. We also want to know from these checklists where they're going toward. So not just where they're starting from, but what's the next step? What's the next level that we should be helping them attain, right? So in this one, in oral language competencies, we are looking at are they establishing eye contact with speakers? Are they listening attentively at shared book time? Are they remembering the story content when books are shared repeatedly? Can they remember if we're repeating a book with the class? Do they participate in conversations with the teacher? Do they participate in conversations with their peers? And these are some of the things that we want to know. And the way we use these checklists is we can just mark yes or no, they do this or not, and we would put the date on top. So over here in this first row up here, you would have the dates on which you observed these skills, and then you would put in these columns Y or an N for a yes or a no, you saw it present. You can also use the checklist with frequency. So you can say very frequently or seldom or not observed, right? So you can give also a frequency, observed by frequency, and a frequency check on each of these skills that would give you a little bit more information of just a yes or no, which would give you the idea of if the child did it once only, versus a frequency would give you some sort of observation over time. The other or the second checklist that we have is for phonological awareness. And when we're talking about phonological awareness, we are trying to identify if the child orally identifies rhyming words, if the child visually identifies rhyming words, if the child can identify initial sounds of words or ending sounds of words, or two or more words that have the same initial sounds, such as alliterations, or if the child can associate individual letters with specific sounds, and so on. So this one you would use exactly the same way, jotting down the date on top and then marking either with a yes or no or with a frequency check. Focus on print is the third checklist that we have, and it's going to help us see how much the child is engaging in decoding and encoding, right? And so things that we would be observing would be understand that print communicates meaning. Does the child understand this? Does the child identify by name the individual letters of the alphabet? Does the child write his or her name? Does the child attempt to track print when reading a familiar book on his own? Or does the child track print when they write on their own? And so on. And again, here you would also use yes or no, or you would use the frequency scale to collect that information. The fourth checklist is looking at metalinguistic knowledge, which is another area that's going to give us an idea of what the emergent literacy skills are for, and language skills are for the child. So here we want to know if the child distinguishes the front cover, back cover, and book title, if the child distinguishes between the letters and the words, if the child can indicate that print proceeds from left to right and top to bottom, if the child distinguishes between the author and the illustrator roles, and so on. So this is knowledge about language and literacy. And again, you would write the date on top and you would check it with either a yes or no or a frequency scale. Then we have the interest in literacy related events checklist. And in this checklist, you would be looking at does the child ask questions about environmental print? Does the child seek out opportunities to interact with books independently? Does the child express pleasure in hearing books read? Does the child attend to the teacher's reading and shared book time? So how interested is the child in literacy activities, and how much is the child engaged while being part of these activities? Again, you would jot the date on top in the top row, and then down the columns you would mark with a yes or no, or if you're using the frequency scale, you would mark how frequently you've seen or observed the child engage in these activities or in these skills. The last checklist that we have is looking at reading and writing for personal purposes. So here you want to know the child interacts with the environmental print to determine location or context. Content. You want to know if the child selects and orally reads specific books during independent activity time. You want to know if the child connects life experiences to events and information in books. You want to know if the child dictates stories or events sequences about personal experiences. You want to know if the child expresses personal preferences for books, rhymes, or songs. Again, you would jot the date on the top row up here, and then down each column for each date that you're observing, you would mark a yes or a no, or use the frequency scale. So these are really good tools for you to be able to identify what your focal child knows, or all the children in your classroom know or don't, in terms of emergent literacy. And they're all in your book. They look a little bit differently than what I'm showing you here, because these are from the first edition of Otto's book. But in the second edition, you'll find exactly the same information, just in a little bit of a different graphic. Okay, so that is it for this week when we're looking at how kindergartners develop language and literacy competencies, and how we can facilitate that for them. Now let's focus on our homework for this week. So this week you're going to turn in your final focal child observation, which is observation number 7. Yeah, hoogity! We have gotten to the end. And your final admin slip number 10, which is focusing on Sotomayor and Martel's chapters 5 and 6, and Otto's chapter 8. This is also your last admin slip. So we can celebrate a little bit here because we've gotten to the end of our observations and our admin slips. There's going to be a Blackboard discussion activity in a discussion board that you'll find there, and it's about how you would facilitate and promote language and literacy development for kindergartners. So what would you do in order to support them? And that is it. That is all for our week 13 lecture and class on language and literacy development for kindergartners.